Good morning. After a wonderful evening yesterday with the title Humanity in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, I'd like to welcome you to the second part of the Futurological Congress. I do it in the name also of Peter Paul Keinrad, Chief of TransArt. We are in a wonderful way embedded as a Futurological Congress in this Festival of Contemporary Culture, TransArt. And I do it also in the name of colleague Roland Benedicta, co-head at the Center of the Center for Advanced Studies. Later, we will have a 10-minute speech by Roland. But now we continue with our first speaker today, Holger Volland, who is the Vice President of the Frankfurter Buchmesse. And he is physically here, which is not normal in days like this. He has studied information science at the Freie Universität Berlin, Free University of Berlin, and his latest book is about the creative power of machines. Die kreative Macht der Maschinen, warum künstliche Intelligenzen bestimmen, was wir morgen fühlen und denken. Mr. Volland, the floor is yours.
Dankeschön, Herr Pechlaner. Jetzt versuche ich das hier. Sehr schön. Welcome, good morning, grüß Gott. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you said, it's important these days to also attend physical events. And I say that not only because I'm coming from one of the oldest physical events, Frankfurter Buchmesse has more than 500 years of existence. But also because it's important that in culture and in the arts, we celebrate people, we celebrate artists, we see their art, we experience it, and the best way you can do it is physically. Now, today I'm talking about a topic that had been around for the last days, and the topic is whether machines can be creative at all. And it was probably 5 years ago, around that time of year, when I stood in a hall at Frankfurter Buchmesse, and it was the evening before the opening. And I stood there and I had a parcel in my hands, and I unwrapped that parcel and I put it on a shelf where it was supposed to be for the next day. And before me was a painting. It was the painting you see here. A Rembrandt painting, my first Rembrandt painting. And I hold it in my hands, I put it on the shelves, I looked at it. That's really interesting. Why did the painter choose that color? Was it fashion at that time? Or did the painter want to tell us something? Maybe about that this man comes from a rich family. Why the hat? Is that also part of the fashion of that time, or is it a statement? Is it an item that stands for something? And look at the eyes and the mouth. The mouth is slightly open. Why did the painter choose to paint it that way? Did he want to tell us a story, the story that this man is going to start to speak to us right away? And then it occurred to me, what I'm doing here is complete nonsense, because I'm thinking about the intention of a painter painting an open mouth or a white collar or a hat when there was no painter involved at all. Because, of course, this painting has not been painted by Rembrandt. It had been painted by algorithms put together by ING DIBA and some collaborators like the Rembrandthus, for example. So the algorithms learned to paint in the manner, in the way that Rembrandt used to paint. And this is the result of that painting. Of course, it's 5 years old now. It is one of the first examples of machine-created art that went around the world. And for me, it was the starting point to think more about the creativity that is involved when AI, when artificial intelligence works or is involved in culture, the art, creative fields. And I want to talk with you about 3 short and very simple questions. First, are machines creative actors? Maybe you heard yesterday the wonderful speech of Professor Nida Rümelin. He talked about agency. So the question is important. Are machines creative actors? Do they take agency? Second, can machines produce creative outputs? And the third one, how do we react to these creative outputs coming from machines and not from humans? So the first question is actually the easiest, because since the machine creativity age just started, we don't know whether machines can be creative actors one day. But what we do know is that we can look at this topic from different angles. Let's look at it from a legal angle. Is work created by a machine, can it be copyrighted? Does it have a copyright so that you can use it and make money out of it, for example? The answer is no. No creative copyright for machine works. It has to be a human involved in order to create copyrightable work. Maybe you remember the case of a monkey drawing paintings several years ago. Also, the question at that time was, is that work copyrightable coming from the monkey? No, it is not, because there was no human involved. We can look at the from a psychological angle. How does Csikszentmihalyi, for example, define creativity? It is the ability to create something that is useful as well as original. Now, that is a bit more difficult, because if we look at some of the creations coming from machines, they can be useful. But are they original? Most of the examples that I show you in a bit are not. They're mere copies of existing works. The third angle we can look at it is the cognitive science angle. And creativity is defined as something that is based on conceptual thinking, perception, memory, and reflective self-criticism by Margaret Boden. She created that definition. And if you look at that, you have to say, well, machines cannot be creative actors in that sense, because so far there is no machine that is able to self-reflect, to have criticism of their own work. The second question is more fun, actually. Can machines produce creative outputs? And this is something we have been seeing for the last hours, for the last years, if you were on the web. And we see many examples coming from language, from image, from music, from moving image. And I brought some of these creative outputs deriving from machines. So this is a latest example coming from the artist Mario Klingemann. And he used algorithms from GPT-3, from the OpenAI initiative. And GPT-3 was just launched recently, and it's sort of a text computer. And it works in a very simple way. You start a sentence. So Mario Klingemann, for example, started the sentence with "it." And then the machine creates a whole story out of it. And Mario Klingemann chose to locate that story in London in the summer of 1897. And what you can read here, this is all text coming from a machine. And if you read it, if you have the time to read it, we don't have, unfortunately, then you'll find out that it makes sense. It's a good story, actually. The machine came up with a good story. Now, how can this machine, GPT-3, create such a great story? It uses all the knowledge, all the written knowledge that is available on the web. Billions of web pages, billions of pieces of knowledge that are the foundation for such a story. This is another example of AI being creative when inventing text. I like to play games, and one of the games I just recently discovered is called AI Dungeon. And in AI Dungeon, you choose to be a character. So I chose to be the character of Ophelia, and she's a princess, and she's living in the kingdom of Larion. Now, the game is purely text-based. You ask questions, you give answers, and then the game reacts to you. And the game is an AI engine, so there are no predefined text. All the text coming out of that game, all the story points are made up by the artificial intelligence when it is interacting with a human player. So, for example, Ophelia, she received a knight. So a knight came into the room, and the knight said, "Oh, the king is dead." Or no, the king is in his bed. He cannot reign anymore. So as Ophelia, I asked, what's up with the king? What happened to him? So the software answered, the king, a respectful man who seems to dislike the questioning, tells you, the knight, blah, 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 tells you the king is in a coma. Okay, I learned it is in a coma. Now, I knew that my task is to make sure that this kingdom is not going out of order. I have to make sure that this kingdom is reigned. And me, as Ophelia, the princess, I have to make sure that while the king is in a coma, something has to be done. So the knight asked me what I want to do. And I said, I want to talk to my people. So I wrote that. And then the answer of the machine was, you decide that it would be best to take charge of this situation and tell everybody to calm down. So in the end, after several questions, I completed the quest. And it was really interesting playing the game with the machine because it reacted so incredibly well to even small hints that I gave or small pieces of literature advice, for example, I baked in. Well, you've seen this example. This is a prime example of why machine art is discussed so well out there. And on the left-hand side, this is the fake Rembrandt, the next Rembrandt, and I brought you a real Rembrandt on the right side as well, so that you can compare these. If we had more time, it would be really interesting to dive into these images and to have a look at parts of the image, because now from afar, it looks like a real painting of a real young man. But if you look closer, for example, you see that there are artifacts somewhere at the collar, or that the skin is not very well painted, and so on. So if you look very closely, of course, you can see that this is a machine painting. But we've talked about the Rembrandt before. I want to talk with you about music, because this image is taken from a press release involving Matthias Röder and Deutsche Telekom. And I think you heard Matthias Röder yesterday talking about that project here. It's Beethoven's Unfinished Symphony. And what Matthias Röder, with the help of Deutsche Telekom, did was engaging an AI that learns how Beethoven wrote his music. Now, that AI knows how Beethoven wrote his music, composed it. It is able to finish an unfinished symphony. And so far, I think it's still work in progress, but they're gonna present the whole work sometime this year. And I'm really excited to hear it. What I heard so far is interesting, but you could still tell where Beethoven ends and the machine starts. And right next to Matthias Röder, here, is also someone that you're going to meet later today. Ahmed El-Gamal, he's also a close friend since many years. And what Ahmed El-Gamal did was interesting, because he took abstract art pieces of Art Basel, and he trained a machine in order to learn how to paint abstract art that would be possibly presented at Art Basel. And we will have a look at that project, because what Ahmed El-Gamal did was not only asking the machine to paint in a way that modern abstract artists paint, but he also asked people like you and me, how do you like that? Which version do you like better, the machine version or the human version? But we'll come to that in a second. So what we see here is that music can be created by machines when it has some examples, in this case, for example, Beethoven, but there are also many examples out there of machines creating Bach music, for example, but also modern music. And I'll show you an example of what that does to our culture in a bit, but first I have a video. If there are any children under, let's say 15 in this room, please leave, because we have some explicit lyrics.
Hoes in this house, there's some hoes in this house, there's some hoes in this house, there's some hoes in this house.
I said certified free, 7 days a week, wet ass pussy, make that pull out game weak.
So please excuse the quality of that video. I took it live from a TikTok channel. And what you see here is an example of how people use AI, use algorithms in order to create moving images. Now, the images of President Trump and Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, they're not very well done, yes? But the software is for free, and it was probably some 12-year-old somewhere in this world creating this video with software that is freely available and images that are freely available. How does it work? The software learns from still images of people, for example, Hillary Clinton, how Hillary Clinton looks in different poses. And then it uses the original video footage of, for example, someone singing that song, in this case Cardi B, and maps the images to the video. And then in the end, you have a video of Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and President Trump performing WAP from Cardi B. The third question for me is the most interesting one. How do we react to non-human creative outputs? Because, as you will see, the reactions, our reactions, aren't that different from how we react to real human-made art and creations. For example, I don't know whether you know these two models. They aren't AI creations, but I talked to the designer and he used a lot of AI tools to create the models. And the interesting thing about these models is that they don't exist. They're made up, but they have, in the meantime, hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, on Facebook, I know, maybe on TikTok as well. There are videos of these supermodels, not only images anymore, and people interact with them. They like what they post, they ask questions, they treat these models as if they were real human beings. Of course, everybody knows that they are not, but still people love to interact with these puppets. So we follow and interact machine-made art. We also pay for machine-made art. And I think it was 1.5 years ago when Christie sold a first AI-made painting for hundreds of thousands of dollars in an auction. And here you see the painting that was sold at Mont de Bellamy, and it came from an artist collective from Paris. And he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for that AI-made art. And Ahmed El Gamal also has a shop where you can buy actually the machine creations. So we're learning slowly to also treat these machine-made works as something that is valuable, that has value for us, that we can use, that we can buy, and we can use it, for example, to create designs, to use it in advertising or whatever. We pay for it. Now, this is the example I promised. This is from a study that Ahmed did with his CAN images. So CAN stands for Creative Adversarial Network. That's a special way of using algorithms to create something. And all of these 8 images here are machine-created images. And when Ahmed asked people, how do you like that? 60% found those images more aesthetically appealing than real abstract art that was sold at Art Basel. So apparently, we like what we see when it comes to machine creations. Also an interesting point of discussion, why is that so? And maybe we can come to that later in in our discussion. And here, as one last example, we listen and enjoy AI music. Because on Spotify, I don't know who of you is on Spotify? Raise your hands. Yeah, I think it's a bit more probably, but let's say a quarter of you. And we all follow playlists, right? So there's this playlist called Soothing Piano Tunes, I think. And I like to listen to it because it's soothing piano tunes. And if you look closer at that list, you'll find some of these artists. And these artists don't exist. They're made-up artist names for music that was composed by AI. So no musician, no composer, no record company is being paid for these songs when we listen to them. Instead, AI was used to be trained. It was trained by other music in that list, and it was used to create something similar. We listen to it, we enjoy it. So in the end, there are more and more cases of machine creations that are treated by us as if they were real creativity, as if they were creations by human beings. And of course, this changes the way we use culture, it changes the way we use art, and this is a discussion that will continue for the next years, I guess. So I'm really thankful that we had the chance to have a brief look at it today, but maybe we'll have the chance for deeper discussion later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holger Volland. Very interesting and a very good start of this morning. You started also to bring some questions, and I guess we should have the time later to discuss them. But definitely there is also a question related to the value. Yeah? The economic value on one hand, why do we like and why do we pay for that kind of art? But then there is also a value related to cultural basis and societal values. Well, it's great